Hello, my name is Brandon Meriai, and this is for Unit 2 Leadership and Teamwork P5. Okay, so I'm going to discuss the types of teams which are formal, informal, temporary, and permanent within the police. A formal team is a team that has a clear structure and their goals are monitored by a leader. For example, the detectives within the police, they would have their goals monitored and their cases that they are looking into, they'd be monitored, and progress would be a key factor into what they're looking into. An informal team would be a team with very little rules and very little disciplinary actions. A structure. This could be a structure of a voluntary group. So, for example, in the police, the special constables. This can be an example of this. The special constables is a voluntary group within the police. They have the full powers as normal police officers, just they volunteer their own time from their normal jobs to be a police officer. That would be an informal team. A temporary team is a team that's set up at a short notice for a specific goal. For example, a CTSFO, which is a counter-terrorism specialist firearms officer. They will be set up at a short notice to go into counter-terrorist situations and deal with them. A permanent team would be a team that are fixed and cannot be removed or dismantled. An example of this would be the just normal police officers on the beat. You can't really get rid of them, really. You can't just remove them because they are a permanent team that will be always policing that area. That's an example of that. We're now going to move on to discuss the 4 types of teams which I have chosen from the public services. From the police, and I'm going to read my notes out for that. Okay, so the first group I have is the Armed Response Unit within the police. They provide the police with a armed deterrent and support for firearms use if needed. This would increase the effectiveness of the police against armed criminals and terrorists, as you have the option for lethal and non-lethal force, such as taser and baton gun, and of course, lethal weapons. When working in a team, the armed response units are one of the best teams to not feel alienated from. The reason for that is because they have, if someone shoots someone, they have a non-shoot to kill policy, and there's always support if someone does. Now, of course, the police officers put into trial from the courts when they do shoot someone, as any murder would, or shooting. But there would be judged as it a lawful or unlawful killing. So the police within the armed response units reduce the alienation by working with that person to create the bond and socialise with the other people to make sure they don't feel alienated from the rest of the group after the shooting. They innovate in many different ways with their colleagues to encounter situations by sharing ideas. For example, how they might take down a vehicle, if there's a hard stop or a tactical contact. And they communicate with each other to tackle their issues. They share expertise of other units within the police to make themselves feel more valued and, in general, boost morale. So, for example, they might share their expertise with normal units because they know much more about firearms, how to make them safe, how they're used, why they're used, that sort of things. They would share that with other units within the police, like the traffic unit, the MPAS unit, and CID possibly. They identify and develop within the team. The team leaders will do this by identifying skill sets within the individuals within the team. So if someone's good at communicating, they will put that person in the front left seat of the vehicle and make him communicate with the control room instead of leaving him back sorting out the weapons out. If someone's good with their hands, they would be in the back working with the weapons, of course. But if they're not, then they would be in the front communicating. They implement change by looking over policies and procedures and seeing how they can change that towards their role. So pretty much, like I've said previously, the shoot-to-kill policy is a thing that they've not allowed, which is a good thing, really, because that doesn't mean police officers can shoot people if they feel a threat. They'd have to take them down with just one shot, so they can only shoot one bullet each time, and if they feel necessary to shoot another, they will. And the use of force, obviously. So if they implement changes like that, then they can make the force better overall. The next unit I'm going to talk about is the MPAS unit, which is the National Police Air Service. They assist the police and provide them with visual aids and recording evidence for court proceedings. They will not allow criminals to escape by adapting and changing their location above the criminals, and obviously using the visual aid and communicating with the officers on the ground to update their location so they can catch the criminals, obviously. For example, if something happened, like a laser was shown at the pilot or one of the navigators, and because they're wearing night vision, of course, in night situations, it would affect them. They can't really see, so it would blind the pilot. They would reduce the alienation by working together in that sort of situation, and of course they can back each other up, saying it did happen. You know, there was actually a laser shown at us, and of course with the video evidence as well from the cameras, it would help. They innovate by sharing ideas with their colleagues. So if one has a different imagination or plan for a different flight route that they could take to avoid weather patterns or to get to a scene faster or a pursuit, then they could do that. They share their expertise by working with other members within their team so they feel more valued, and they socialise together and communicate to effectively get rid of their issues. For example, if one of the systems isn't working within the aircraft, they'll tell the engineer that that's not working, and he would fix that for them. So he'd share his expertise with the navigator and tell him, you know, it's actually not broken. For example, if it wasn't, it's not broken. You just need to do this to get it back up and running. That's another example. For example, like the radar or the cameras. The identification of development within the skills and skill sets within the team. The leader would have to look out, which is probably the pilot within the aircraft. He would have to look out for his co-pilot and, of course, the navigator and the engineer in the back. He would have to make sure they know what their roles are, and, of course, their skill sets he needs to develop and put them in the suitable roles for their skill sets. So, for example, if he's an engineer and he's not very good at communicating, then you would give that role to the navigator to communicate to the ground units on the ground, which would make more sense. Implementing change is a big thing within the National Police Air Service, as they have the ability to change their policies. And for example, aircraft, the police helicopters, not allowed to fly under 200 metres. In certain situations they can, so they've implemented that change because in weather conditions sometimes the weather is lower, the cloud height is lower than 200 metres, so they have to bring their aircraft down or else they couldn't be operational. So they bring that change in recently, which is a good change to bring for the policies for the team. CID, which stands for Criminal Investigation Department. This is a unit that is formed of detectives and contributes to investigating complex crimes. They share their expertise with other units to bring them cases and explain what has gone on. They've developed more and innovated with forensics and computer animations to recreate crime scenes, which is a good innovation they've done there. They also reduce alienation by backing each other up in many situations with cases and files, for example. You know, if they need to find something, for example, a weapon, a crime scene, they'd always have that second person in the room. So a detective is not allowed in a room on his own when investigating a crime scene with forensics, because they could tamper with evidence. So they change that, which is a good thing. So they reduce the alienation with each other. Identifying and developing with their team's skill sets. They do this so they have enough people and they know what they're doing with their skill sets. So, for example, if someone's very good at noticing things, he's got photographic memory, they'll put that person within the team, and this provides at no extra cost at all for the police, which is a great thing for the CID and the police force in general, because he's invested his photographic memory skills to the police, which is a very good thing to have as a detective. Implementing change. They implement change by communicating with the group. So, for example, they might have a meeting or a briefing, and they'll talk to each other and explain what they think should be changed, and they'll implement the changes. The last unit I have is the traffic unit within the police. Not Highways England, but the actual traffic officers, also known as interceptors. This group mainly focuses on policing the roads and motorways and make sure people abide by regulations and laws that have been put in place. This department would reduce alienation by talking to the officers if something happened. So, for example, if an officer went to a car crash and there was a dead child within the car, they would not make the officer feel as alienated by talking to him and getting him help for mental support. So he doesn't feel very alienated from the rest of his team. And if having a mental issue like that, if something did happen, he'd have to have a lot of support and have people talk to him to get him socialising again. Make him want to do the job, because it could come out of a cost for the police if he doesn't want to do his job anymore because he's seen that side of the job. Another change would be the innovation. They share ideas with their colleagues. So, for example, back in 1970s, the police didn't have radars in their cars. They didn't have speedometers, which could track the speeds of other vehicles in front of them or behind. And they did have ANPR, for example, which is automatic number plate recognition. They have to implement that into the changes within the police, so it makes them more of an effective unit. And they do this by innovating. Also, that links to sharing expertise, because they share their expertise with the units. If they have ANPR installed in their car, they can share that information. So, for example, if a car is driving along and the traffic unit picks up that vehicle and it has a marker for violent crime and firearms, and he's wanted for attempted murder, for instance, the owner of that vehicle, they wouldn't take over that situation, but they share their expertise because they have the equipment and the knowledge of that ANPR picking that vehicle up. They would then transfer that to the armed response unit to take over. So they're sharing their expertise with other units and with their own. Identification and development. They use the skill sets again. They'd always be double crewed. So if something did happen, say a pursuit, say a vehicle just fails to stop, they would then be able to communicate with other officers, because that officer would have the skill set that he's been put in the place in the left-hand seat to speak to other officers in different vehicles in the control room to update them the location, the speed, etc. of the vehicle. So that's the skill set that the officer would have, which is communication. They would implement change by talking with the community, get to know what's going on and how policies and procedures are changing for the good and bad in the community. They would know what's going on. So if some drivers are not liking the new change about the threaded tyres, the thread your tyres has to be a certain amount, then they would talk to the drivers and explain to them why they've implemented that change within the law. Okay, that is my 4 units. I'm now going to talk about the different types of teams within the public services. So you'll have a divisional team, which this means different groups within the public services. An example of this would be the police anti-drug division. Emergency services. Normal small teams who have a specific role. These will be teams that usually haven't worked together before, as the only time they will ever work together will be the scene of emergency. At a scene of an emergency, They wouldn't have trained together before, but they will be different divisions or of different services. For example, the fire service will work with the police force in a certain emergency. Project teams. Normally small teams who have a specialist role. Project teams will be a temporarily put together team, and they are only in operation for a very short period of time before it is disbanded. Each member of this team is most likely to be a member of another team or division in the public services. A project team is basically a group of people from different teams who come together to share knowledge with each other and work together to get a job done. Search and rescue. Normally small teams have a specific role. Search and rescue teams, as the name implies, are there to search a scene and rescue as many lives or specific items as possible. There are usually sub-teams in a division or in a service. For example, the army has a combat search and rescue team set out that are there to search and rescue and carry out aid within or near a combat zone. Specialist teams. Normally small teams have a specific role. Specialist teams are teams that are created to be used in specific situations and could inform of a small-sized team. For example, the police force has multiple specialist teams. A few of these are prison handling teams, local priority crime team, serious crime teams, major crime teams, and so on. These are teams that are sent out depending on the severity of the situation. Force. Forces within any public services don't really exist anymore, but they used to be a very popular name for the police, also known as the police force. They became known as the police service instead of the police force, but they're still widely referred to as force, as a task force could be team formed for a very special purpose of working on a specific area or project, or finding out a resolution to a very critical problem. For example, a bomb blast, terrorist attacks. This would be an example of a large-sized formal team. Brigade. A brigade is a subdivision of an army. This typically consists of small brigades, can also be a formation of fighting units together with support arms and services. They are smaller than divisions. And usually commanded by a brigadier. Brigades are usually used when a small but effective team is needed to get a specific job done. A regiment. A permanent unit of the public service or the army, typically commanded by a colonel and divided into several companies, squadrons, batteries, and often 2 or more battalions. Multidisciplinary. A multidisciplinary team is a team where everyone in that team has a specific job. An example of this would be the special branch in the police force. Geographical. A team organised around a certain area. An example of this would be within the police force, and this would be the Thames Valley Police. Sectional. Sectional is a subdivision of the police force. An example of this would be the mounted section within the police force, which is the horses. Departmental. Departmental is similar to divisional, in which it is simply different groups in a selected public service. An example of this would be the air support unit within the police force, or also known as MPAS. I'm going to conclude now what I've talked about. I've talked about the different types of teams, which are formal, informal, temporary, and permanent groups within the police. I have also talked about 4 different types of teams in the police and explained how they reduce alienation, they foster innovation, share their expertise, and identify